The writers' strike has just formally ended.
99% of members from the Writers Guild of America have voted in favor of ratifying the new contract deal between them and the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. TV companies can finally return to their regularly scheduled programming. But looking back, how some of these studios handled the strike versus how they did back in 2008 can help us better understand the stakes. And let me tell ya, this time around things looked a lot different for production studios versus how they did in 2008, at least from an outside perspective. And with rapid technological advancements in AI and streaming technology, it's not out of the question that the Writers Guild could find themselves in a strike yet again.
How will studios stay prepared? And how can we, as consumers, use this information to ensure fair contracts for our writers?
Let's find out. So if you're living under a rock, the Writers Guild of America recently went on strike. It was all over the media and the common consensus was clear. Screenwriters deserve better contracts that reflect our current technology and streaming. So naturally, because of this strike, writers weren't making new scripts for television. But not everyone suffered the immediate consequences. Many big production studios were already strapped in. Big streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and Disney were already prepared since they had been stockpiling scripts since well before the strike officially began. They embraced selective production and made major decisions on which programs they could go ahead with and which ones needed to be scrapped. Netflix had to delay the final season of one of their most popular shows, Stranger Things, but they still saw positive capital within the beginning of the strike. What? The strike meant Netflix could completely slash their production costs, and their studios in other countries were really able to thrive under these conditions. See, no area around the globe was affected as much as America and other English-speaking countries, so many foreign production studios actually saw an increase in capital. They were actually able to reach a much larger audience since people needed something to watch. So obviously Netflix and other similar streaming services were well prepared for the strike, and diversified long before losing any money in the initial weeks. Well, it sounds like they've done this before. They have done it before. See, back in 2008, a very similar strike took place. This time, the Writers Guild wanted fair compensation for new broadcast technologies like DVD releases and
the internet.
And while evolving companies like Netflix were the primary target, other broadcast companies certainly felt the burn. An estimated $2.1 billion and 37,000 jobs were lost in this strike. And so many production studios and individual employees suffered the consequences. So, these studios realized if they wanted to survive the strike, they'd need to adapt. Companies like Disney and Nickelodeon saw a
major shift in content away from scripted television. Before diving into this shift, it's important to first look at how their content was before the strike. On March 24, 2006, Hannah Montana premiered on the Disney Channel to massive acclaim and success. The pilot amassed almost 5.5 million viewers, which at the time made it the most viewed event in Disney Channel history. It was also the most viewed piece of programming in children's programming in almost 7 years at the time. The success of the pilot is mainly attributed to the 2 music videos they used as promotional material. They played it for weeks on Disney Channel before the premiere debut and seemed to do pretty well. While Disney Channel had previously dabbled in music stars in their programming, namely Hilary Duff, child star turned singer, and the star-studded cast of the Mickey Mouse Club, which is still surprising. The Hannah Montana show was actually the first show that they had with a singing main character, which is crazy when you think about all the musical shows that popped up after that time. Possibly in preparation for the 2007-2008 writers' strike, a musical act consisting of 3 brothers made it onto the Hannah Montana show like months before. I wonder why. The Jonas Brothers, who reached pop stardom after officially starring in Camp Rock, got their own TV show, Jonas and Jonas LA, but they were a very popular musical act. Now, personally, I don't think that the Jonas Brothers were introduced to the public eye in front of a large audience of music-loving tweens 2 months before the writer's strike on coincidence. But hey, maybe. Instead, I think that Disney, as a multimedia conglomerate and a mostly self-contained production house, put these talented child stars in front of the public eye right when they knew that things were getting a little risky for them in the television business, in part to build up their audience and to possibly increase their revenue flow. A set of touring artists, or maybe even one touring artist, would bring in a lot of revenue, especially when you're not making television programming that is doing gangbusters. This practice later spawned shows such as Sunny with a Chance, Ant Farm, Wizards of Waverly Place, Austin and Ally, as well as launched multiple celebrities' careers like Demi Lovato, Selena Gomez, Zendaya, weirdly, Ross Lynch. Who's the other one? Bridget Medler. Nickelodeon saw what Disney was doing and we were like, hey, that's a pretty good idea. Let's steal it. In September 2007, 2 months before the writer's strike, Nickelodeon introduced their own new quirky comedy, iCarly, which featured, you guessed it, a main character who sings the theme show song. When the strike first started, Nickelodeon rushed to turn their new TV stars into singers. Miranda Cosgrove was signed on to Nickelodeon Records, and Jeanette McCurdy, her co-star, was signed onto Big Machine Records out of Nashville, which is owned by Universal, who had a working relationship with Nickelodeon. Surprise! Jeanette McCurdy detailed her experience as a country music singer in her recently released memoir. Doesn't sound like a good time. She had no say in things like song lyrics, direction of music, performance. These were all decided for her by Nickelodeon. All songwriting was done by ghost songwriters who themselves were under very immensely unfair contracts. Miranda and Jeanette both had to sign these very extensive contracts and NDAs, making it near impossible to mention any of the specifics in great detail in public. This is all to say that the exploitation of both actors and writers only continued during the strike, just in more covert ways.
Well, that was weird. Anyway, it's clear to see production companies were not prepared for a strike in 2008. Luckily, they've been able to learn from their mistakes and not be left empty-handed when it came time for the 2023 strike. However, some companies did not get to learn this lesson. Newer streaming services like Prime Video had almost no experience in union labor. So after the strike hit, they were forced to cancel their critically acclaimed series, A League of Their Own, and instead begin a production of a low-effort reality TV show, Caesar's Playhouse, a show that follows a rapper in a house with 8 different girls. Being unprepared for a strike and having to scrap quality content for unscripted reality shows? I feel like I've seen this somewhere before.
You certainly have. Now let's talk about the state of reality television before and after the 2007-2008 writer's strike. TLC, also known as the Learning Channel for whatever reason, used to have programming like Untold Stories of the ER, Ballroom Boot Camp, and Flip That House pre-2007. Their whole shtick was presenting interesting content that, while not necessarily educational because it's TLC, had some sort of merit to it. They would have things about first aid, home improvement, general science and culture. It was nice. Late 2008 into 2009 saw a bit of a shift in their programming. 19 Kids and Counting, Toddlers and Tiaras, and I Didn't Know I Was Pregnant all aired right after the strike. These shows were entirely unscripted, using only interviews and testimonials and footage that the cameramen could scrape up. As the titles may suggest, they were also incredibly exploitative of their subjects. Womp womp. This isn't to say that the programming that they had at the time was purely exploitative. They definitely had Cake Boss. And also, let me be clear, I'm definitely not saying that TLC was the only channel who was doing it, or that this kind of programming only happened post-2007. The Simple Life from 2004, starring Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie, was just a show about impossibly rich girls degrading what most Americans at the time would call a normal life. Like, hence the name, A Simple Life. But without this kind of cheap and easy programming that really hinged on the pull of morbid curiosity, we wouldn't have seen shows like Freaky Eaters, My Strange Addiction, or Strange Sex. It's more than a little obvious that there was a significant drop in quality. While moderately entertaining, public opinion generally stated that this kind of programming was trashy. This kind of content only came about because of a lack of writers.
So how can we as consumers ensure fair compensation for these writers in the future with new advancements in technology?
We need to remind these companies that, ultimately, we're the ones who make their money.
Maybe that means waiting to watch the new season of your favorite show.
Maybe that means being well informed and staying away from the problem streaming services.
It's important to remember that if a strike were to come again, these companies will be well practiced in never running out of content.
So ultimately, it'll be up to us whether or not writers get their fair compensation.
Until next time.